Hey everybody, it's Dana, the Decision Smith. How are you? My goodness, I can't believe it's already the third time I've been live in this group this month. December is going by so quickly. I'm wearing my ugly Christmas sweater today. If you can see that on the screen, it's not usually something I would wear, but it's got a big ugly neck with some big ugly buttons, and thought I'd share a little bit of festiveness today. It's also actually my daughter's 17th birthday today, and it's the 17th, so it's her champagne birthday, so we are celebrating in style. So lots going on in our household. But today, really, really excited to come to you with my third topic of the month, where I'll be diving into my 5-step decision-making system and the app that I have that goes along with the 5 steps. But before we get to that, just going back over the last few weeks in terms of the conversations that we've had, I started out the first week of December talking to you about my year of you challenge. And I really, I've talked a lot about it on interviews and in conversations over the last couple of weeks. And I'm really encouraged by the feedback that I've been receiving from people who have gone through the year of you challenge. And just a reminder, it's a simple, free 5-day challenge that you can go through just for a reset. And it's great at this time of year. So you can really identify what kind of goals you want to set for yourself. Come January, just get the new year started off properly. So again, thanks for all the feedback on that. Last week when I was on live, I talked to you about the book that I published this past summer that went to #1 in international bestseller status. And that's The Decision to Purge the Year the Skeletons Fell Out of the Closet. We had some conversations around, the writing of that book and the impact that it had on some of my readers that, reached out to me to share with me what it was that they took away from the book. I think I also mentioned at the end of that I had also published a second book that went to bestseller status. It was a collaborative book. And it's called Success Rituals Volume 2. And that was really exciting to be a part of. And more exciting news, just this past week on Tuesday, launched a third book for 2020. It's been a year. And it's called She Rises for Tomorrow. And it's, again, another collaborative effort that I worked through with a group out of Australia. And we went to #1 in international bestseller status overnight with that book as well. So it's been quite an exciting week, as you can tell so far. And I'm so excited to tap into my actual system today and the app that I have that goes along with it. I think this is the crux of all of the work that I do. So, when we look at decision making as a whole, people ask me all the time, how did you get into decision making? How did it become something that you were so focused on? And, I go back 30 years now because it was 1990. Ugh, it seems like a lifetime ago. And I was in a first year psychology class at university. And on the board in front of me was this huge onerous matrix that we were using to make decisions as it related to research psychology. And I really, truly saw the validity in the algorithms and the mathematics behind this matrix. It fascinated me. I'm a really truly a math person at heart, and I was astounded by what could be done with this matrix as it related actually to that class. But I always say that there must have been some kind of switch that flipped in my brain that day, because I left that class thinking, wow, if we've got this huge process that is so beneficial, in the scientific world or the engineering world or, the business world in general, you know, people, everyday people, laymen, they're faced with tough decisions and struggles every single day. So isn't there something for them? So from that day forward, my path was set on a search to find a system that would enable, kids, adults, seniors, anybody to make any tough decision that they were faced with confidently. Because we can all make decisions, but how do we know if it's the right decision until we're in it and we realize, oops, that probably wasn't the right path to take. So, I spent 15 years working through a system. I did so much research, and I actually, started with a simple system, and I tested it on myself. And I tested it on myself for 15 years. I used it to make decisions about school, what I would take, and then what school I would go to. I was dating a guy at the time, and did I use the system to determine whether or not we stayed dating or not? We didn't. Then with a new relationship in my life, I used it to determine whether or not we would move in together. And when we moved in together, was it going to be to rent or to own? And then when we finally owned, where to buy, what house to buy. We used it to buy vehicles, what vacations to take. We used it to determine to get married or not, to have kids. Like, it's so, malleable, and such a useful tool that can be used for any type of decision that you're faced with in your life. And professionally, people use it to make decisions about hiring and things like that. So it's just, it works for every type of decision you might be faced with. People don't obviously use it to decide where to go for dinner. Actually, some people do, but it's quite a process to go through to have to use that just to decide where to go to dinner. But for 15 years I used it on myself, and I found myself feeling really good about the decisions I was making, and really positive, and I was leading a fantastic life. And I became a much more confident decision maker. And so, my career path has always been in human resources. So I'm always working with people, talking to them about career progression, doing different things to make their lives better. And so about 15 years ago, like I say, after I'd tested it for myself so many years, I decided to kind of start dripping it into conversations that I was having with people that I knew well. And I'd say to them, I have this system that I use to make decisions. I know you're faced with one. Would you be interested in kind of being a guinea pig for me and learning what this system is about and seeing if it works for you? And the response I got was like incredulous. People were like, where has this been all my life? It's so easy. It's so simple. I feel so good about this decision. I feel so good about, all the parameters that we've taken into account. I feel like I've turned over, every stone, and there's nothing left for me to explore to be able to make this decision. So, I thought, I guess there is some validity to, this process and this system. And back then, this was before, gosh, can I even say it was before smartphones? I was still using an Excel spreadsheet, and all my algorithms were built into the back of that. But, I've tried to keep up with the times. And a few years ago, I launched, an actual app that you can download from iTunes and Google Play. And we'll get to that in a bit. But, we really looked at this opportunity to give you something that was in the palm of your hand that you could use on a daily basis, or whenever you were faced with a tough decision, to be able to walk through. So that's kind of, from 30 years ago to present day, where we are from a system perspective. When you think about making decisions, if you think about the last big decision you made for yourself, and I'd love to hear your comments if you're willing to share what last big decision you were faced with, or perhaps you have a big decision coming up. Just put in the comments perhaps a topic or a theme that you're faced with right now. I'd love to understand where you might have had to expend some of your decision making muscle. But typically when people go into decision making mode, what's the first thing they think about, or what's the kind of the tried and true recipe that people fall back on to be able to start making tough decisions? I'll give you a second. A lot of you probably know. it's a pros and cons list. And I think we've all been, made familiar with pros and cons lists. And I don't discount them. They have a purpose, but it's a very small purpose in terms of making decisions. And really, we're going to talk today about the pros and cons of a pros and cons list. So let's talk about the pros first of all. So you have a decision to make. You look at what choices you have in front of you, and you start writing down what the good things are as it relates to that particular choice, and what the bad things might be. If you were to move forward with that choice. And I love the fact that exercise takes you through writing down all the things that you're taking into consideration. But that's probably the end of where I love a pros and cons list, because without getting into the psychology of decision making and all the the back end information that I've studied, your intuition plays such a huge role in making decisions that you probably have already made the decision somewhere, subconsciously, before you even get to the stage of making a pros and cons list. So what happens when you start writing down your pros and cons is you have kind of an unconscious bias that sneaks in that, really sways your pros and cons lists in terms of what what number of items you write on one side of the list versus the other. So that's, something that happens subconsciously that we aren't aware of. So that's one thing that a pros and cons, for me it's a way it's not useful. The other piece is that, when you write your pros and cons list, you might have one pro that outweighs 10 cons. So how do you map for that? How do you account for that? There might be one thing, and even though your list of cons is so much longer, do you choose not to go with that because your list is longer, even though the one thing on the pros side means more to you than anything on the con side? So how do you account for all of that? So, I know there are people out there who have been successful making decisions using a pros and cons list, and perhaps they're a little bit more in tune with their own intuition. Maybe it's luck, beginner's luck, who knows? But what I like to say is that the system that I walk people through is essentially a pros and cons list on steroids. So it really takes that thought process and expands it. So let's talk now about the actual 5 steps of the system. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I've got some, assets and things like that you can tap into to get more information. But I do want to share, a few quick anecdotal stories around some of the steps as well. So first for you, I'll list the steps, and then I'm going to go back and talk about them each a little bit more. So in the 5 steps, step 1 is to identify your decision. And that seems pretty simple, right? Well, it typically is. I'll tell you a story where it's not so simple. The second step is to list your options. So again, what choices do you have in front of you? Typically, we're seeing 2 or 3 choices. Sometimes I've seen decisions with 7 choices. That's a pretty big lot to choose from. We try to narrow it down, but if that's how many you have to choose from, that's how many you have to choose from. The third step is to define your factors, and that's where we're making that list of things that we're taking into consideration in making this decision. And again, that's where the pros and cons list, it kind of comes into play. We really just put those 2 lists together, and we use neutral language when we're identifying them. We don't say that it would make more money versus less money or something like that. Say it's a career choice. We just talk about salary, and without a positive or negative injector to it. So those are that's step 3, defining your factors. Step 4 is actually to rate your factors, because we want to know how important these items are to you right now as you're making the decision. And the final step is to score your options against the factors. And so that, near the end, there's a lot more math that comes into play, and that's where my algorithms come into play. But the app walks you through those 5 steps, and then you hit a button that says get results, and it does all the math for you behind the scenes. And the app gives you a mathematical score and a percentage that actually points you in the right direction. So really, again, a repeat. Step 1, identify your decision. Step 2, list your options. Step 3, define your factors. Step 4, rate your factors. And step 5, score your options. It sounds pretty simple, and it really is. But one of the things that we have to make sure that we're taking into account when we're making decisions, and especially using this process, is that you're completely honest with yourself. Because the minute you aren't, your numbers will be skewed. I can tell. I've done this process, walked through it with so many people that I know immediately if somebody is really ready to make a decision or is trying to fool me into thinking that they're ready. So, lots goes into that from a mindset perspective. And you really need to ensure that you're diving deep, that you're tapping into what it is that you're really making a decision about, knowing that the results that you get are going to show you what the best option is for you, provided that you're honest with the information that you input into the app. All right, let's go back to step 1, which was identify your decision. I want to tell you a really quick story about a client that I had that, we actually had a stumbling block a little bit right at this first step, which is unusual, but it was actually comical in the end. So I was working with an athlete, and he had been playing his sport in a league for 5 years in his town. And he loved the managers, and he loved the teammates, and he really embraced the league. It was a community. He really realized and was really appreciative of the time that his coaches had spent with him, and the parent groups and things like that. But he also realized that he wasn't progressing in his sport at a rate that he would have liked to have seen. And he realized that was because the caliber of athletes that he was playing with were either on his level or even potentially a little bit lower. A few of the athletes that he might have been playing against maybe were a little bit higher in caliber, but there wasn't anybody stretching him. And he was made aware of another league in town that, same sport, same opportunities, but perceived as a little bit higher in caliber in terms of the the talent level of the athletes, as well as the competitors they faced. They just got to see a little bit more in terms of geography and where they played. So they got a bigger pool of competitors to play against. I think one of the other pieces was that in the current league he was in, he also had to play his house league as well on a weekly basis. Even though he played a year up, it's still, he was playing with teammates that certainly didn't have maybe the passion or the drive that he did in his sport. Whereas the new league, you weren't required to do that. So we started our conversation, and one of the first things I always ask my clients is, okay, when do you have to make a decision by? And he said to me, well, tryouts start this weekend. And I said, tryouts? Oh, so you haven't been offered a new spot on the team yet? And he said, no. I said, oh, well, your decision today is going to be so much easier to make than you actually thought it was going to be. Because when you came to me, I perceived that the decision you thought you had to make was one about whether or not you were going to move to the new league. When in fact, the only decision you have to make today is to decide whether or not to try out. And he was like, oh, that's easy. That's a no-brainer. And of course I'm going to try out. I said, great. So let's try out. And you could just, almost see the relief in him as that decision was already made. But what I offered at that point in time, I said, hey, listen, would you be interested in walking through the system? In the event that you are made an offer, to the new team. So at least you've given some thought to, what you're taking into consideration. And he was amenable to that. He said, sure, let's walk through it. But as we started walking through his factors and rating his factors, he actually stopped me and he was emotional. And he said, we don't need to go any farther. And I said, well, why not? He goes, because I already know my answer. Like, it's so clear that if I get a spot on this new team, I have to take it. I know I have allegiance to my old team and, I love the coaches and my teammates, but it's so clear for me right now that moving to the new league, if I get that opportunity, is in my best interest. And I said to him, do you mind going through, finishing through, just so we make sure that, the score that you get corroborates your thoughts right now? And he said, absolutely. So, we finished going through and it did show that the scores for moving to the new league were much higher than the scores, staying where he was. So off he went, he tried out, and a while later I got a call back. And during the call, he let me know that he had been offered. There was one remaining spot on the new team. They brought back the entire team from the year prior and added one new spot, and he was offered that spot. And so I said to him, oh, so do we need to have a conversation? He goes, oh, no, I accepted already. I knew from our conversation what I was going to do. And I told the coach right on the spot that I was going to, take him up on his offer to move to the new league. So again, just a story about sometimes getting ahead of yourself. And that's what happens when people make decisions. They think about one decision and then it snowballs to the next decision and the next decision. And all of a sudden it just becomes this big gargantuan task to overcome. So people, go all the way to the back and they don't do anything just because, it becomes so huge for them in their mind. So one of the things I really work to do with my clients is to step it back and make sure we're just, biting off, as much as we can chew for that particular week or time period, and then moving on to the next when we need to, and not trying to tackle it all at once. Again, something I love about this system. Another thing that I mentioned as we talked about listing your options, which is, step 2, typically 2 or 3 options. I talk a lot about status quo being an option. And it really is in most circumstances, unless you have to make a choice one way or the other. Take a job, for example. I was working with a client who was happy in the job he was in, but had just been headhunted and offered a new job. And, we worked together to determine whether or not that was, a path that he would pursue. And, the scores for the new job weren't actually as high as he had kind of made the job out to be in his head. I think he was attracted to the bright, shiny newness of it. So we talked a lot about, his current job. And he's like, yeah, it's good. It's, I could stay here. But when we looked at his scores for the current job, because we chose status quo as one of his options, he was really dumbfounded at how low the scores were for his current situation. He really didn't think he was tolerating as much as he was in his current job. So from there, we went on to identify that his actual best option was to continue working in the role he's in, but to look for other opportunities that better fit the factors that he was looking for in a new job. So that, that was a really cool exercise as well. We've only got a few minutes left, but I really, there was one conversation I remember, gosh, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago. And it was a client, just somebody I'd met online, never, talked to them, in person, face to face, just an online relationship. And as I was talking to her, she was really, really struggling about a move that she wanted to make. And as we went through listing her factors, she was becoming an emotional talking about that, because a lot of what was holding her to where she was her family's perception of what they felt she should be doing. And then when we got to the part about rating her factors, she actually, well, first of all, when we were talking about the factors, she said some things out loud, and then she kind of gasped and she said, I've never actually admitted those to myself inside my head. And here you are pulling them out of me getting me to vocalize them. She said, I'm like, first of all, I'm shocked that, you made me do that. And I said, oh, I played the instant. But then when we were going through rating those factors, she was really emotional because she realized how much importance she thought she should be placing on her family's wants for her, when in reality, she needed to be looking out for herself. So, the whole process can be really cathartic and really beneficial to tap into not only, the black and white of things, but also the emotional side of things. And that's what I love so much about this system, is that it really pairs the two. For somebody who's very emotional, it gives you the logic with the mathematical scores and that kind of thing. And someone who's black and white, we make you tap into the emotional side and really understand what it is that's propelling you to make this decision. So again, 5-step system, as I mentioned: identify your decision, list your options, define your factors, rate your factors, score your options. The final piece that complements that is the app that I talked about at the outset of the call, and that app is called The Decision Smith. So The Decision Smith, SMITH, and you can find that in iTunes or Google Play. It's a free download that allows you to put in 2 options and 5 factors. There's an upgrade if you need to go beyond that. But help you get a taste of what that looks like from a decision-making perspective. So I can't believe my time is already coming to an end with you for today. I've got one more live this month with you, and it's actually on New Year's Eve day. So on New Year's Eve day, I am so excited to come to you, to talk to you, not only about my blueprint that I have for my decision-making system, but my certification. So I actually certify coaches and therapists and consultants and real estate agents and financial advisors in my system, where they help other people, typically their clients, make tough decisions. I even use it with managers and people who are working in the corporate world. So on that day, I'm going to be walking through the 6 modules that I have in the certification, and I'm going to share with you how you can also tap into that knowledge if you're interested. All right, I'm going to leave my information in the comments with regard to the app that we discussed today and my decision-making system. I'll leave my website. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. You always know where to find me. Comments, DM. The Decision Smith is my handle across all social media channels. So hope to see you there. All right. Hope everybody has a great holiday, because like I said, the next time I come to you will be New Year's Eve, and we'll see you then. Take care.